Mr. President,
Senator from Tennessee.
are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I ask that we dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Every American should be grateful that President Trump, Vice President Vance, the cabinet, and thousands of other attendees were not harmed during Saturday's disturbing shooting that took place at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. We now know that the shooter was attempting to kill the president, and this was the third assassination attempt we have seen on his life in the past couple of years. Now, some Democrats, and I would include former President Obama in this, some have claimed that we don't have details about the suspect's motives, but we do have plenty of details. And we know that the shooter actually laid a good bit of this out. He did a manifesto, and he sent that manifesto to his family shortly before the attack. And the shooter said he was going to target administration officials and, quoting from that manifesto, prioritize from highest ranking to lowest. It shows you he thought this through. Now, his reason for this, he said President Trump is, and I quote his wording here again, pedophile, rapist, traitor. Now, this is unhinged rhetoric. It is completely in line with the lies that the Democrats have repeated on just about a daily basis, every day, regarding President Trump. We've heard it on TV, on podcasts, on social media, in their speeches. And it is something else that they continue with this rhetoric. And Governor Tim Walz, who of course was the VP nominee in the last election, once said, and I will quote his statement, "No one has ever been more dangerous to this country than Donald Trump, and he is a fascist to his core," end quote. Again, that was Governor Tim Walz. Now, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have called the president an existential threat to democracy, the most significant threat to American democracy since the Civil War, and an authoritarian. And some of them have chosen to compare him to historical figures. And that historical figure they usually use is Hitler. And of course, Kamala Harris once compared him to a communist dictator. Mr. President, this is reckless rhetoric. This is the kind of rhetoric that needs to stop, because this places a target on our president. And this is the type of rhetoric that has no place in civil public life. Now, we are celebrating America 250, and we are looking at how this nation has remained strong and free. Indeed, I think that as you look at our history, those tenets of faith, family, freedom, hope, and opportunity have served us well. And how do we achieve that American dream? Well, we have kept ourselves free and focused on achieving that dream for each and every person. They all look different. Everybody's dream is different of what they want, what their goals are, the type of community they want to live in. They're all different. But we arrive at decisions of what kind of communities we will have, what kind of country we will have, those issues of importance. We arrive there through robust, respectful, bipartisan debate. We don't get there by exercising reckless rhetoric, some of which I have quoted, and it is so disappointing to hear this from some of our colleagues and then to see the type of vitriol that this spurs. Now, when we have robust, respectful, bipartisan debate, I share my opinion, someone else shares their opinion. What this does is to empower not only us, but the people that we represent to enter in to that debate, to be a part of the public square, to defend our freedoms, to build consensus, and to serve the American people and to preserve the freedoms that we enjoy. Now, without it, without having that marketplace of ideas, without that robust, respectful debate that leads to exchange and asking, what if we did this? What if we did that? If we did not have that, then this nation would head to a very dark place. And this latest assassination attempt on President Trump is another reminder of what can happen when Americans abandon the possibility of working together and instead of settling their differences by debate in the public square, they choose to settle these differences by violence, by reckless rhetoric. So as we approach our nation's 250th anniversary, we need to remember that it is this exchange of ideas and this robust, respectful debate that has helped to sustain the freedoms that we enjoy in this country. Now, on a separate but related topic, we go to this issue of Department of Homeland Security funding. And it is important that we remember that the agency that is responsible for protecting our president, his family, our vice president, his family, our cabinet members, they all have a security detail. But the agency is the Secret Service. And the Secret Service is in the Department of Homeland Security, as is Homeland Security Investigations, ICE, Border Patrol, TSA. See, it all comes out of that DHS budget. And we now are on day 74 of the Democrats' latest shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. It's the third time this Congress that they have chosen to shut down Homeland Security. Now, to ensure that agents continue to receive their paychecks, President Trump has resorted to using funds from the Working Families Tax Cut Big Beautiful Bill that we passed last year. And thank goodness that we did. And I will remind the chamber, every single Democrat voted against that bill. Every single Democrat voted against your pocketbook. They voted to increase your taxes by voting no on the big, beautiful bill. Well, thank goodness we got it passed, because that's where the president's been able to go and move some money around and pay people that are working without a paycheck. Now, you know, Mr. President, it makes you wonder how many people would choose to continue to work and not receive a paycheck. But that is what our Democrat colleagues continue to do. Last night, I did a telephone town hall And on this town hall was a grandmother who lives in Middle Tennessee. Her question to me was very pointed. She said, "Senator Blackburn, my grandson is in the Coast Guard. Have you all figured out how to pay the Coast Guard?" The Coast Guard. They're funded by DHS. So our colleagues across the aisle, Mr. President, have chosen to say to the Coast Guard, "Forget it. We are not for paying you." So think about this. When you talk about going after human traffickers and drug runners, the Democrats don't want to fund that activity. When you talk about Homeland Security investigations that helps to find missing children, that locks up pedophiles and predators, that locks up groomers, they don't want to go after them. They're choosing to not fund that agency. Well, I had another caller on the town hall last night, and they said, "I don't get this. Why don't they want to pay TSA? Why don't they want to pay ICE agents who were picking up people that broke the law to come into the country and have committed crimes and need to be deported?" These are people that, by and large, most have orders of deportation already issued against them. They're ready to be deported. And the answer is disappointing, but it's what the Democrats will tell you. Their goal is to abolish ICE, to open the border back up and just say, "Y'all come, anybody can come." We're going to vacate immigration law. And their third goal is to defund the police. You know, during Joe Biden's era, they loved the fact, loved it. The border was wide open. And we had illegal aliens entering the country by the thousands and the millions. They liked it that way. Didn't know who was in the country, but they were glad they were here. They wanted more sanctuary cities. And again, Mr. President, what we see the Democrats doing, they're putting illegal aliens before citizens. They're not funding, will not fund federal law enforcement, don't want to fund immigration, don't want to fund the Coast Guard, don't want to fund the TSA. I guess they just think that there should be no scanning and no review. So we know that that is their goal, and we know also that they don't want to deal on this. They want to continue to have a fight. They want this issue. Their goal is to abolish ICE, to defund federal law enforcement. That is where they are headed, so they like having a shutdown. Well, they continue with this political charade, and we have now passed a budget resolution that is going to open the path for us for a targeted public safety reconciliation bill that is going to fund these issues through President Trump's term. We will take this issue off the table. Now, we did this on the big, beautiful bill. We did it through reconciliation. We did it with 51 votes. And as I said earlier, not one single Democrat, not one, voted for the big, beautiful bill. And we will make certain that ICE and CBP and these other agencies are funded, and we will do it without a single Democrat vote. And also doing it this way, the Democrats will have none of the reforms they pretended to want when it came to Homeland Security. I yield the floor.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, you and I are the elected representatives of our states, and sometimes we speak not on behalf of our state, on behalf of ourselves, but on behalf of our entire state. Now is one of those times. Everyone in Louisiana felt grief at the mass shooting in Shreveport that I spoke to on this floor last week. Now, I speak for all in Louisiana who feel grief at the mass shooting in Baton Rouge last week. And our whole state feels this grief. We all grieve. I have a friend, Callais Temple, famous in Louisiana, the first African-American who played basketball for LSU. He called to say that he, as a parent, felt the grief of this young lady's family. And it was Callais who compelled me to speak today. Because every family can imagine no longer having their child or their sibling. We all grieve. Every classmate can picture walking into school and seeing an empty chair where their classmate once sat. We all grieve. Every friend can imagine going on a carefree senior skip day. If you're older than 18, you can imagine or you remember when you were once 18 and something awful happened. And indeed, every friend grieves. Mr. President, what do we say when words fail? We can say that all in my state, in my country, are deeply and profoundly sorry, and that all of Louisiana grieves with Martha's family. So, I ask that this body and all who hear join in a quiet moment for the life of Martha Odom, for everyone who loved her, loves her still, and will always love her. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to speak about a bill that Senator Shaheen and I introduced recently. It is called the Improving Needed Safeguards for Users of Life-Saving Insulin Now Act, or the Insulin Act. This bill would make insulin more affordable for Americans with diabetes. I would like to also recognize the work of Senators Warnock and Kennedy, who joined us in introducing this important bill. In 1997, Mr. President, I founded the Senate Diabetes Caucus after meeting with a family from Maine who had a 10-year-old son with type 1 diabetes. I'll never forget this young boy looking up at me and saying to me that he wished that he could just take one day off from having type 1 diabetes, his birthday or Christmas, just one day. But of course, he could not. It was then that I knew that I had to dedicate my efforts toward earlier diagnosis, better treatments and technology, and one day a cure. Since 2009, Senator Shaheen and I have co-chaired the Diabetes Caucus in the Senate and worked together to fund vital research and advance policies that will improve the lives of those who are living with diabetes. One of our top priorities has been to make insulin more affordable. Now, Mr. President, insulin was first isolated more than 100 years ago in Canada, and the scientists who did discover it gave away, essentially, the patent rights because they wanted insulin to be available and affordable to everyone who needed it. Tens of millions of Americans rely on insulin as part of their daily treatment for their diabetes. For children, teens, and adults with type 1 diabetes, insulin is not optional. It is literally a matter of life or death. About 20% of those with type 2 diabetes are also insulin dependent. While there are some exciting and extraordinary scientific breakthroughs in cell and gene therapy that may change this, and the sooner the better, the fact is that today, people who are dependent on insulin still face great anxiety about its affordability. I have heard from far too many people across Maine and across this country who, because of the escalating cost of insulin, feel they have to ration their insulin and do not take the full dose that their physician has prescribed and that they need to be healthy. Let me tell you of one example. Beck Hoskins of Chelsea, Maine, is a young adult. Beck was forced to skip her doses of insulin to try to make it last longer, to stretch it out, because she simply could not afford the cost. In one profoundly memorable instance, Beck pushed her body's limit too far, and she ended up in the emergency room. Her husband, Barrett, rushed her through a snowstorm to the hospital, and she nearly died because she tried to go without insulin for 2 days. Such a dangerous, preventable crisis should never occur. We must address this life-threatening problem. Senator Shaheen and I have introduced legislation to reduce the price of insulin in the past 2 Congresses, and we've made some progress. For example, 3 of the biggest insulin manufacturers, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi, voluntarily chose to cut their list prices. This is encouraging, but there is more work to be done. We also joined together for reforms in the pharmacy benefit manager system, which encouraged PBMs to choose the highest priced insulin for insurance formularies. That was because their compensation was frequently a percentage of the list price. Much of that we are fixing, and some of it was fixed last year. But we need more legislation to fix the fundamental problems in the insulin market, including limited biosimilar competition, as well as barriers to patients' access. The Insulin Act would do just that. Our bill would limit cost sharing for insulin to no more than $35 a month, or 25% of the list price per month for at least one type of insulin for each type that is needed and dosage form for patients who have commercial insurance. Our bill would also prohibit insurers and pharmacy benefit managers from placing utilization obstacles such as prior authorization and step therapy on products that have capped costs. These important patient protections will deliver immediate out-of-pocket relief. The Insulin Act of 2026 will also promote generic and biosimilar competition in the insurance market to further drive down prices through more competition. The bill would create a new expedited FDA pathway to promote biosimilar competition. It would take similar steps to enhance regulatory certainty for biosimilar drug companies, such as by requiring the FDA to prioritize actions such as inspections and communications with manufacturers. We can't have a situation where a biosimilar, which is like a generic for insulin, is launched at a low price, but faces obstacles to its approval, even if it's absolutely identical to a brand name insulin. And we can't allow, and we've seen this before, pharmacy benefit managers refuse to choose that lower price biosimilar product for the insurance company's formulary simply because they will make less on the deal. Finally, Mr. President, this bill helps address the insulin needs of uninsured Americans by creating a pilot grant program for states to implement to identify people with diabetes who are uninsured and provide them with insulin at $35 a month. It will also create an insulin resource center and a hotline for people with diabetes who are uninsured to help connect them with programs so that they can secure insulin that they need in order to be healthy. Mr. President, the Insulin Act will help make insulin more affordable for Americans, both those with and without insurance by capping the cost and addressing fundamental flaws in the insulin market and the FDA approval process. I thank the American Diabetes Association, Breakthrough T1D, and the Endocrine Society for endorsing this much-needed legislation. Mr. President, let me just add one final point. If individuals who are insulin dependent are able to use their insulin, they not only are going to be healthier and avoid severe ramifications of not taking insulin, the healthcare system is going to save money. It is far less expensive to help people afford the insulin that they need for their diabetes than to have them hospitalized or at risk of losing a limb or becoming blind or having other severe consequences because they are not able to afford their insulin. So, Mr. President, I would encourage my colleagues to join us in supporting this bipartisan and much-needed legislation. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Austin Brooks.
Senator from Texas.
President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I've come to the floor to talk about a law that most people will have never heard of, but it's very, very important to our national security, and that's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, as we sometimes refer to it. We're approaching the expiration of this Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act later this week, and time's wasting for us to get this actually done. I know it's important for us to have debates and offer constructive suggestions about changes in these laws, but we cannot risk going dark on this essential intelligence gathering law, which actually has empowered President Trump to help keep the country safe. Without getting into the merits of one of these proposals or another, let me just take a step back and talk about the importance of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and national security. One of the major misconceptions about this is it's a law enforcement tool, but it's not. It's not primarily a law enforcement tool. Now, it is illegal to commit espionage in this country, but the main reason this is used is to collect information from people overseas on national security threats to the United States. And it allows the intelligence community to connect the dots, to understand what our adversaries are up to. FISA was enacted in 1978 in order to provide more transparency and avoid overreach of surveillance of domestic actors. If you read the history of the FBI, going back during the J. Edgar Hoover days, there was a lot of things that the FBI was doing under J. Edgar Hoover that today we would blanch at and certainly consider illegal when it regards surveillance of U.S. persons. So FISA was enacted to make sure that we did not allow any unconstitutional surveillance of American citizens, but we did preserve the ability to gain information about foreign actors overseas on potential national security threats to the United States. Section 702, which is the provision that expires in a very short time now, was first enacted in 2008, and as I said, authorizes the U.S. government to target for foreign, hence the word foreign in the FISA, foreign intelligence collection of non-U.S. persons. Now, that's a bureaucratic way of just saying American citizens you cannot surveil American citizens no matter where they are, even if they're overseas. So it only authorizes surveillance of foreign intelligence collection for non-U.S. persons overseas, outside of the United States. Unlike traditional criminal investigations where warrants are issued based on probable cause, that is, showing a probable cause to a judge that a crime has been committed, thus justifying issuance of a warrant to then search or collect information here in America. Unlike that, intelligence gathering is significantly different because it involves the monitoring of foreign intelligence to detect and prevent threats before they happen. So our criminal justice system is designed to investigate and prosecute crimes that occur after they happen, but the intelligence community needs these tools like FISA to be able to prevent bad things from happening. So it is forward-leaning rather than retrospective. President Trump has asked Congress to reauthorize this essential authority as the current law properly balances intelligence needs with privacy protections of U.S. citizens. Let me just put a finer point on that. To allow this to expire would be an affront to the president, but also it would essentially blind the president to this essential intelligence that he uses on a daily basis in his president's daily brief. Many folks are familiar with the fact that the president gets intelligence briefings on a daily basis, and it's called the PDR, President's Daily PDB, President's Daily Brief. So the intelligence agencies, notably the CIA or the Director of National Intelligence, will brief the president on national security threats. 60% of the information contained in the president's daily brief is a product of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. So to allow that to expire would basically handicap the president in terms of getting access to the information he needs in order to work within the U.S. government to keep the public and our nation safe. So 60% of the president's daily brief is a product of 702 of FISA. In 2025, a quarter, 25%, of the national security agencies, that's our signals intelligence agency, 25% of their reports were comprised of information gathered under Section 702. This information, of course, has allowed the United States government to thwart terrorist attacks and to make sure that we protect the public at large. It's also helped us find and rescue American hostages and much more. In April of 2024, Congress responded to the concerns that some had raised about privacy of U.S. citizens by passing the Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act, the RISAA, RISA, I guess. I'm not sure how we pronounce that. That's the acronym, RISAA, Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act. So these concerns which led to these reforms included incidents such as the unlawful targeting of Carter Page, a Trump campaign aide during the run-up to the president's election in 2016. But that is a different section of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Obviously, Carter Page was an American citizen, and based on what I've said, you've heard me say you can't surveil American citizens, whether they're at home or abroad, without a warrant. So this would not apply to the Carter Page case, although I agree it was an abomination, where an FBI lawyer basically misrepresented the facts to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, who then issued a warrant on Carter Page. And the Justice Department has since admitted that it did not have probable cause to surveil him. So a different Section 702 is different from the Carter Page example. So the RISAA was crafted to address past abuses of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance authorities and privacy and civil liberty concerns, while ensuring that the government had the capability in order to protect Americans from foreign threats. The provisions enacted into the law have gone a long way to curb the likelihood of abuses that were happening under FISA authorities during the Obama and the Biden administrations. According to a recent report from the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, the reforms that Congress passed under RISA have had positive effects regarding safeguarding of privacy and civil liberty. These included significant reforms to the way that the FBI can conduct U.S. person queries. So when the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 02, is authorized overseas on a non-citizen, but if they communicate with an American citizen here in the United States, that information is maintained in a database by the intelligence agencies. It is a lawfully collected information, not for the purposes of a criminal investigation, but for purposes of collecting intelligence to be able to connect the dots to protect the nation. Targeting refers to the actual collection of data on non-U.S. persons abroad who may be potential threats, while querying or looking into the data that's collected in that process is different. It's worth repeating again, only non-U.S. persons abroad may be targeted under 702. But RISA, the reforms, included stronger oversight measures and consequences for violations of these new requirements, which was entirely appropriate. Part of this is not only to address potential violations, but also to build the public's confidence that their own government is not spying on them, as I've heard some people suggest. But perhaps the most significant reforms in RISA were how these queries of lawfully collected information were conducted. Due to new requirements from RISA, queries of U.S. persons under already lawfully collected information are now further restricted and subject to 3 reviews. That's sort of a belt and suspenders approach to making sure we protect American citizens. Since 2023, the total number of queries of U.S. persons has dropped by 87%. According to the Privacy and Oversight Board, within the first year after the enactment of these reforms, more than 98% of the FBI's queries of already lawfully collected information were compliant with these new requirements. The report concludes that while the implementation of these reforms are still being studied, it's clear they're having a positive effect on the privacy of American citizens. Furthermore, FISA remains a very important tool that the U.S. government uses in order to support our national security, which is why President Trump has been so adamant that we need to get this law reauthorized and not let it go dark. Last March, CIA Director John Ratcliffe testified that 70% of his agency's success in countering advanced weapons proliferation and 90% of their success in interdicting synthetic drugs like fentanyl was a result of information acquired by using Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Section 702 allows the United States government to vet foreign persons seeking to enter the United States for connections to terrorism and international drug trafficking operations. It's also a critical tool for combating cyber threats. Section 702 has proved particularly useful for the U.S. government's effort to crack down on illicit drug trafficking into the country. This intelligence has helped the United States, together with our friends, to identify the supply chain for precursor chemicals coming from China and used to make synthetic drugs like fentanyl in Mexico, and also has allowed the intelligence agencies to seize machinery in China that would have been able to produce millions of pills per hour, these pill presses, these automated pill presses. Section 702 has also allowed our Border Patrol to seize these pill presses at the border. Reports indicate that 90% of the CIA's successful interdiction of synthetic drugs like fentanyl is attributable to Section 702. So some people are suggesting it ought to go dark. We ought not to extend it. Makes no sense when you begin to look at how effective it's been in keeping the country safe. Section 702 is also important in counterterrorism. Information acquired under that section has allowed the FBI to identify a potential terrorist threat in October of 2023 related to the Israel-Gaza conflict. The FBI was able to warn the Department of Defense and the relevant host nations about this threat against American troops. In another instance, Section 702 allowed the U.S. to discover and thwart a planned terrorist attack against a high-profile concert in Europe. These are just a couple of examples of numerous examples of ways that Section 702 has helped the United States protect our citizens against foreign threats. And no one knows that better than President Trump, who's the daily consumer of this information. Again, 60% of his daily intelligence brief is composed of Section 02 intelligence. And of course, the president is responsible for the protection of all of our citizens and U.S. interests. And that's why he's asked us to reauthorize this critical authority. President Trump recently wrote on Truth Social to say, with the ongoing successful military activities against the terrorist Iranian regime, it's more important than ever that we remain vigilant, protect our homeland troops and diplomats stationed abroad, and maintain our ability to quickly stop bad actors seeking to cause harm to our people and our country. After 4 years of weakness under President Biden, President Trump is showing the world that the United States is once again a power to be dealt with. It's imperative we equip the President and the entire administration, working with Congress in oversight capacity, like on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, on which I serve. It's important that we equip the Trump administration with the tools and authorities they need to maintain deterrence and hopefully peace through strength. We cannot, Mr. President, allow this authority to expire. It would be foolhardy and reckless to do so. So President Trump has asked us to reauthorize FISA Section 702, and I hope all of our colleagues in both chambers will not tie the President's hands behind his back while we have Americans in active combat overseas. And we need this essential intelligence in order to protect our people and our homeland. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I'd note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Senator from Missouri,
I would ask for unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also have 9 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have approval of the majority and the minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, I now note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Mr. President,
Democratic Leader,
are we in a quorum?
we are.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, earlier this morning, the conservative majority on the Supreme Court took another step towards resurrecting the Jim Crow South in a decision that, for all practical purposes, upends half a century of precedent, defies the spirit of the American civil rights movement, and reverses generations of progress towards racial justice. The right-wing court today essentially declared it valid and appropriate for states to discriminate against racial minorities in drawing districts. The Voting Rights Act, a law written in the blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice of Americans who marched, who fought, and died for the right to vote and to prevent racial discrimination, has been diminished once again. The consequence of this decision is as clear as it is dangerous. Fewer protections for voters, more power for politicians to draw maps that silence them, particularly historically disenfranchised voters. Now the conservative court has tried to make it seem like its decision today was narrow and tailored. But let's be very clear. In the words of Justice Kagan, this decision is a demolition of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. It opens the floodgates for states across the South to redraw their congressional districts and make voters of color essentially invisible in our democracy. By some estimates, this decision could lead conservative state legislatures to draw as many as 19 additional seats that favor Republicans in the House. So far from being a narrow decision, this MAGA court is trying to give Republicans a leg up, an illegitimate leg up in future elections. Let me say it again. This case is the MAGA court trying to give Republicans a leg up in future elections. It is a knife to the heart of some of the most important civil rights legislation that past generations marched for, organized for, and bled for. It will bring back the old sinister practices, long discarded to the dustbin of history. State legislatures diluting, erasing, and overpowering voters of color. Shame on the High Court. Shame on the MAGA justices rigging our elections. And this did not happen all at once. For years, this court, beginning with the Roberts decision and the awful Shelby County decision, chipped away at the Voting Rights Act, decision by a decision. Chief Justice Roberts bears a lot of the blame for this awful decision. And the commitment of equal representation has been broken before. But every time Americans have forced it back into the law, Senate Democrats will fight it once again to reverse this awful, awful decision. And even before this wretched decision, we knew the MAGA far right was hell-bent on trying to undermine our democracy. And so, we know that MAGA right is trying to rig our democracy. We knew it long before this decision. Donald Trump knows, his party knows, that they're going to lose this election in 2026, which is why they're working round the clock to tilt their scales unfairly in their favor. Trump issued another executive order a month ago to subvert our elections. Last week, they took aim at the Southern Poverty Law Center to chill speech and suppress actions from organizations that protect democracy. Trump continues to push for his SAVE Act to disenfranchise tens of millions of Americans. And he stacked his administration with election deniers. So today, I am launching the Democratic Party's most expansive effort to date to protect the 2026 midterm elections and to shield them from the direct threats posed by Trump and MAGA Republicans. This afternoon, a group of senators and I will meet with former Attorney General Eric Holder, Mark Elias, and some of the country's top election experts to talk about how we can be ready for any and all threats that might come against our elections this fall. And I want to thank my Senate Democratic colleagues for joining in today's meeting. We know that some on the extreme right will try to rig the system. Donald Trump said it. He said he can't win the election except by rigging it. That's more or less what he said. Donald Trump's Justice Department sought to seize state voter rolls. Right-wingers raided election offices in Georgia. They pressed election officials in Arizona to turn over documents. Online radicals are threatening poll workers, spreading lies about voter fraud. And here in Congress, hard-right Republicans are trying to pass Jim Crow 2.0 in the SAVE Act. These threats are only going to intensify the closer we get to Election Day. So our election fraud task force represents the most aggressive and coordinated effort to date to make sure our elections this fall are protected. The goal of our task force is to ensure that every vote counts and every American can participate in our democracy without coercion, intimidation, or threats from Donald Trump or anyone else. Now on DHS, a lot's happening today. Last night, Donald Trump confirmed what I've been saying for weeks. Speaker Johnson and House Republicans are holding up funding for the Department of Homeland Security. They are holding it up, the Republicans, not Democrats. The White House said it, in effect. The White House put a memo urging House Republicans to stop dithering and pass the DHS bill that every Democrat and every Republican in the Senate passed unanimously, not once, but twice. For weeks, Republicans have tried to pin the blame for their shutdown on Democrats. The Trump administration just exposed how preposterous that lie is. Republican dysfunction is endangering our national security. House Republicans have been so busy fighting one another in the House that FISA may expire. Republicans, get your act together. Our national security depends on it. While Democrats have been trying to fund the Secret Service, TSA, Coast Guard, CISA, FEMA, and other crucial agencies, Republicans have been trying to jam through as much as another $140 billion for Trump's rogue agencies. And while Democrats have been working diligently and assiduously to try and lower Americans' costs, Republicans want to splurge on a $400 million gold-plated ballroom for the president. The last thing Americans want us spending their tax dollars on is a gilded palace for Donald Trump. What will Trump ask for Americans to pay for next? A moat? What else could $400 million get Americans? A year of child care for 30,000 families, skills for training 50,000 new electricians, plumbers, and welders, disaster loans for 10,000 households, and so much more. Keep in mind that just 1 month ago today, Donald Trump said, quote, "There's not one dime of government money going into the ballroom." Then put your money where your mouth is, President Trump. Stop trying to waste Americans' hard-earned tax dollars on this extravagance and get your party to work with Democrats to keep the American people safe. And finally, on Iran and gas prices. As I said, there's a lot going on. Just hours ago, Pentagon officials told Congress that Trump's disastrous war has cost taxpayers $25 billion. Can you believe it? At least $25 billion, and we're less than 2 months into this war. $25 billion is just the sticker price. Americans are also paying for this war at the pump. This morning, average gas prices in America hit $4.23 a gallon. That's a record high since the start of the war. Let me repeat. U.S. gas prices at the highest level since beginning of war in Iran. It's now $4.23, up 40% since Trump started his costly war with Iran. The price of gas is the highest been in 4 years. There's only one person to blame, Donald J. Trump. Trump says he's bleeding Iran economically, but he's draining the pockets of American families. And for what? The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. The Iranian regime is still radical. Our service members are still in harm's way. Trump still has no idea how to end this blunder. Instead, we hear reports that Trump's telling his aides to prepare for a protracted blockade. This morning, Trump warned that Iran better get smart soon. Well, it's Donald Trump who better get smart soon and end this war, unless he wants Americans to continue paying $4.23 at the pump. This week, Democrats will force a vote on our War Powers Resolution for the 6th time. We'll continue to force votes every week as this war rages on. I urge my Republican friends, you can help bail Donald Trump out of his mess. Vote with us to end this war, or you, Republican senators, will continue to face the outrage of the American people. This Friday marks 60 days since Trump officially notified Congress that he had launched this reckless war. Under the War Powers Act, Trump must seek authorization for his war to continue beyond 60 days. After that deadline, Republicans will have no place to hide. No more hollow excuses to let this fighting continue. Republicans know Trump's handling of this war has been a disaster. They see how much the American people are hurting right now. How many war power resolutions do Democrats need to put before Senate Republicans until they do what's right? How many Americans will have to go bankrupt? How many days do our service members have to spend apart from their families? And how many people will have to die before Trump realizes that this war must end? I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Department of Justice, Robert Cekada of Florida to be Director, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
The question is on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Mr. Armstrong, Ms. Baldwin,